The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Windsor Castle as King Charles III adjusted his tie for the third time. Queen Camilla watched from across their private sitting room, her experienced eye noting the subtle tension in her husband's shoulders. Today was more than just another diplomatic meeting. It represented a continuation of the delicate dance of international relations that had defined British-German cooperation for decades. "You're nervous," Camilla observed, setting down her morning tea. Her voice carried the warmth that had become familiar to the British public since her marriage to Charles, but underneath lay the steel of someone who understood the weight of royal responsibility. Charles turned from the window where he had been watching the final preparations in the castle courtyard. Staff members moved with practiced efficiency, arranging flowers, positioning security barriers, and ensuring every detail met the exacting standards expected for a state visit. "Not nervous," he corrected gently. "Mindful. President Steinmeier represents more than just Germany today. He represents the future of European cooperation at a time when such cooperation has never been more crucial." The German president's visit had been planned for months, but recent events across Europe had given their meeting additional significance. Economic pressures, security concerns, and the ongoing challenges of post-Brexit relationships meant that every gesture, every word, would be analyzed by diplomats and journalists across two continents. Camilla moved to stand beside her husband at the window. Below them, the final touches were being applied to what would serve as the backdrop for photographs that would appear in newspapers from London to Berlin. The Union Jack and German tricolor hung side by side, their colors bright against the ancient stone walls of the castle. "Tell me about him again," Camilla requested, though she had already been thoroughly briefed. She had learned that sometimes hearing Charles speak about the people he would meet helped her understand not just the facts, but the emotions and expectations that would shape their interactions. "Frank-Walter Steinmeier," Charles began, his voice taking on the measured tone he used when considering complex political matters. "A career diplomat before becoming president, he understands the delicate balance required in international relations. He served as foreign minister during some of Germany's most challenging diplomatic periods. More importantly, he believes in the kind of quiet, steady leadership that builds bridges rather than walls." The king paused, watching as security personnel conducted their final sweeps of the areas where the president would walk. "His wife, Elke Budenbender, is a judge. She brings her own perspective on European legal cooperation. They're both people who understand that democracy requires constant tending, like a garden." A soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Private Secretary Sir Clive Alderton entered, his bearing conveying the urgency that surrounded all royal scheduling. "Your Majesties, the President's motorcade has left the embassy, estimated arrival in 45 minutes. Charles nodded, straightening his jacket one final time. The morning's preparation had been meticulous, from the selection of gifts that would honor German culture without appearing ostentatious, to the careful planning of conversation topics that would advance diplomatic goals while maintaining the personal warmth that characterized effective royal diplomacy. "The seating arrangements for the luncheon?" Camilla inquired, her question directed toward Sir Clive, but her attention still focused on the activity below their window. "Confirmed with the German advance team, Your Majesty. President Steinmeier will be seated to His Majesty's right, with Mrs. Budenbender to Your Majesty's left. The German ambassador and his wife will be positioned to facilitate conversation flow while maintaining protocol requirements." The Queen nodded, satisfied with arrangements that would allow for both formal diplomatic discourse and the kind of personal exchanges that often proved most valuable in international relations. She had learned through years of royal duties that the conversations that occurred between formal speeches often carried more weight than the carefully scripted official remarks. Charles moved toward the door, but paused to look back at the room where they had spent the morning preparing. The private sitting room, with its comfortable chairs and personal photographs, represented the human side of monarchy that the public rarely saw. Here, behind closed doors, decisions were made and relationships forged that would influence the direction of nations. "The gift presentation?" he asked Sir Clive, though he knew his staff had confirmed every detail multiple times. "The Chippendale writing desk from the royal collection, as discussed, Your Majesty. The provenance documentation has been prepared, highlighting its creation during the period of early British-German trade relations. The German team has been informed of its historical significance. Queen Camilla joined her husband at the door, her presence adding the element of partnership that had become a hallmark of Charles's reign. Their marriage had brought to the monarchy a sense of mutual support that the public found reassuring during uncertain times. "Mrs. Budenbender's interests?" Camilla asked, demonstrating the attention to personal detail that made royal visits memorable for their guests. "European legal harmonization, particularly in areas of human rights law. She has written extensively on cross-border judicial cooperation. The conversation starter about the recent European court decisions should provide ample common ground." As they walked through the corridors of Windsor Castle toward the state apartments where they would receive their guests, Charles reflected on the evolution of British-German relations since his mother's reign. Queen Elizabeth II had witnessed the transformation from wartime enemies to close allies, a change that required vision, forgiveness, and the kind of patient diplomacy that royal visits exemplified. The carpet beneath their feet had witnessed countless such moments over the centuries. Kings and queens had walked these halls to meet with allies and former enemies, to sign treaties and forge alliances that shaped the course of history. Today would add another chapter to that long story of international cooperation. "The press arrangements?" Charles inquired as they approached the final corridor before the state apartments. "Limited pool coverage for the arrival ceremony, full coverage for the departure statements. The German media delegation has been briefed on photography restrictions and timing. Chancellor Scholz's office has coordinated with Downing Street to ensure message consistency." The mention of the German chancellor reminded Charles of the broader context surrounding the president's visit. While Steinmeier would focus on the cultural and symbolic aspects of British-German relations, the political implications of their meeting would resonate far beyond the walls of Windsor Castle. Queen Camilla's hand briefly touched her husband's arm, a gesture of support that had become natural during their years together. She understood better than most the weight of expectations that accompanied every royal engagement, particularly those involving international relations during times of global uncertainty. The sound of their footsteps echoed softly in the corridor as they made their way toward what would become another page in the long history of royal diplomacy. Behind them, the private spaces of Windsor Castle held the memories of their morning preparation. Ahead lay the formal spaces where ceremony and tradition would serve the larger purpose of maintaining the relationships between nations. The black Mercedes limousine bearing the German presidential standard turned through the gates of Windsor Castle at precisely 11:30. King Charles and Queen Camilla stood waiting in the grand entrance, their positions carefully chosen to provide the appropriate balance of formality and warmth that characterized successful state visits. President Frank-Walter Steinmeier emerged from the vehicle with the measured dignity that had marked his decades in public service. His wife, Elke Budenbender, appeared beside him, her professional bearing softened by a genuine smile as she took in the grandeur of the castle's ancient walls. The couple had visited many official residences during their years representing Germany, but Windsor Castle carried a unique weight in European history. Charles stepped forward, extending his hand to the German president with the practiced grace of someone who had spent a lifetime greeting international dignitaries. "President Steinmeier, welcome to Windsor Castle. We are honored to receive you and Mrs. Budenbender." "Your Majesty," Steinmeier replied, his English carrying only a slight accent after years of diplomatic service. "The honor is ours. Mrs. Budenbender and I have looked forward to this visit with great anticipation." Queen Camilla moved to greet Elke Budenbender, and the two women exchanged pleasantries that would have appeared routine to casual observers, but carried deeper significance for those who understood the intricate protocols of international relations. The wives of heads of state often found themselves serving as cultural ambassadors, their conversations bridging gaps that formal diplomacy sometimes struggled to cross. "Mrs. Budenbender, your work in European legal cooperation has been fascinating to follow," Camilla said as they walked toward the state apartments. "The challenges of harmonizing different legal traditions must require extraordinary patience." "It does indeed, Your Majesty. But I have found that beneath the surface differences, there are shared principles that unite European legal systems. Much like the relationships between our nations, the foundation is often stronger than the apparent divisions." As the group moved through the castle's corridors, President Steinmeier took in the portraits and artifacts that lined the walls. Each piece told a story of British history that intertwined with German heritage in ways both subtle and profound. The Hanoverian monarchs who had ruled Britain for over a century created bonds between the two nations that survived even the darkest periods of the 20th century. "The restoration work in the upper ward has been remarkable," King Charles commented as they passed through areas rebuilt after the devastating fire of 1992. "The craftsmanship required to match original techniques while incorporating modern safety features challenged our best artisans." President Steinmeier paused before a particular painting, his historian's eye drawn to details that revealed the complex relationships between European royal houses. "The interconnections are fascinating. Queen Victoria's letters to her daughter, the German Empress, provide such insight into the personal relationships that shaped political alliances." The conversation revealed the depth of preparation both leaders had undertaken for their meeting. This was not merely ceremonial politeness, but genuine engagement with the historical and cultural foundations that underpinned modern diplomatic relations. Sir Clive Alderton appeared at a discreet distance, his presence serving as a gentle reminder of the schedule that governed royal visits. Every moment was planned, yet flexibility remained essential for the kind of meaningful exchange that made such meetings valuable. "Perhaps we might continue our discussion in the green drawing room," Charles suggested, guiding his guests toward the formal reception area where the morning's substantive conversations would take place. The green drawing room, with its magnificent tapestries and carefully arranged seating, provided an intimate setting for the diplomatic discussions that formed the heart of the visit. Here, away from the cameras and formal protocols, the real work of international relations could begin. Queen Camilla and Elk Budenbender settled into chairs that allowed them to participate in the broader conversation while maintaining their own dialogue about shared interests. Their presence added a dimension to the diplomatic exchange that purely formal meetings often lacked. "The challenges facing Europe today require the kind of cooperation our nations have developed over decades," President Steinmeier began, his tone shifting to reflect the serious nature of their discussions. "Germany and the United Kingdom may have different relationships with European institutions now, but our fundamental interests in peace, prosperity, and democratic values remain aligned." King Charles nodded, his expression reflecting the gravity of the topics they would address. "The bonds between our peoples transcend political arrangements. Our shared commitment to democratic principles, to human rights, and to international law provides the foundation for continued cooperation regardless of changing political circumstances." The conversation that followed touched on subjects ranging from climate change cooperation to security challenges, from cultural exchanges to economic partnerships. Each topic was approached with the understanding that both leaders spoke not just for themselves, but for the millions of citizens whose lives were affected by the decisions made in rooms like this one. Mrs. Budenbender contributed perspectives drawn from her legal background, particularly regarding human rights protections and judicial cooperation. Her insights added depth to discussions that might otherwise have remained at the level of political generalities. "The legal frameworks we develop today will govern international cooperation for generations," she observed. "The precedents we establish in areas like data protection, environmental law, and human rights create the structure within which future relationships will develop." Queen Camilla found herself drawn into conversations about educational exchanges and cultural programs that often provided the human connections underlying formal diplomatic relationships. "Young people who study in each other's countries return home with understanding that transcends political differences," she noted. "These personal connections often prove more durable than political agreements." The morning's discussions revealed the multiple layers of modern diplomacy, from high-level political agreements to practical cooperation in areas like scientific research, law enforcement, and cultural preservation. Each area required different approaches, but contributed to the overall relationship between nations. As the conversation continued, staff members moved quietly through adjacent rooms, preparing for the ceremonial aspects of the visit that would provide public visibility for the private agreements being discussed. The balance between substance and ceremony required careful management to ensure that both objectives were achieved. President Steinmeier's questions about British perspectives on European security challenges reflected Germany's role as a central player in continental affairs. His inquiries were informed by decades of diplomatic experience and an understanding that Britain's position outside European Union structures did not diminish its importance as a security partner. The threats we face, from cybersecurity to traditional military challenges, require responses that transcend institutional boundaries, the king observed. Our cooperation in intelligence sharing and security coordination demonstrates that effective partnerships can exist across different organizational frameworks. The depth of the discussion surprised no one who understood the backgrounds of the participants. Both Charles and Steinmeier brought decades of experience in international affairs to their conversation, while their wives added perspectives from legal and social spheres that enriched the dialogue. As the morning progressed, the formal atmosphere gradually gave way to more personal exchanges that revealed the human dimensions of diplomatic relationships. These moments, while not recorded in official transcripts, often proved most important in building the trust and understanding that made international cooperation possible. The luncheon in the state dining room marked the transition from private diplomatic discussions to the more ceremonial aspects of the presidential visit. The table, set with the finest china from the royal collection, created an atmosphere of elegance that reflected the importance both nations placed on their relationship. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandeliers above, while arrangements of British and German flowers provided subtle reminders of the cultural exchange being celebrated. King Charles rose to offer the first toast, his words carefully chosen to acknowledge both the history shared by their nations and the challenges they faced together. President Steinmeier, Mrs. Budenbender, your visit to Windsor Castle continues a tradition of friendship that has grown stronger with each passing decade. Today we celebrate not just diplomatic relations, but the deep connections between our peoples. The German president's response reflected his own diplomatic experience and his understanding of the symbolic importance of such occasions. Your Majesty, Queen Camilla, we are honored to be received with such warmth and hospitality. The bonds between Germany and the United Kingdom have been forged through shared trials and mutual respect. Today we look forward together, building on foundations laid by previous generations. The conversation during luncheon ranged across topics that revealed the breadth of cooperation between the two nations. Educational exchanges brought thousands of young people from each country to study in the other, creating personal connections that often lasted lifetimes. Cultural programs showcased the artistic achievements of both societies while fostering understanding across traditional boundaries. Elke Budenbender found herself engaged in detailed discussions with Queen Camilla about literacy programs and educational initiatives that both women supported in their respective countries. Their conversation revealed shared concerns about ensuring that all children had access to quality education, regardless of their family circumstances. The reading programs we have developed in Germany focus particularly on children from immigrant families, Mrs. Budenbender explained. We have found that when children feel connected to their adopted country through literature and storytelling, their integration becomes more natural and complete. That mirrors our experience with literacy programs in disadvantaged communities, Queen Camilla replied. Books become bridges to opportunity, but also to understanding between different groups within society. The children who participate often become advocates for others facing similar challenges. Meanwhile, King Charles and President Steinmeier discussed environmental cooperation that went beyond formal international agreements. Both men understood that addressing climate change required not just government action, but changes in how societies thought about their relationship with the natural world. The reforestation projects in the Black Forest have provided models that we are adapting for use in Scotland, Charles noted. The combination of traditional forestry knowledge with modern scientific understanding has produced remarkable results. German foresters have been impressed by the restoration work at Dumfries House, Steinmeier responded. The integration of sustainable agriculture with woodland management offers approaches that could benefit rural communities across Europe. The dining room itself told stories of the evolving relationship between Britain and Germany. Portraits of Queen Victoria looked down on the gathering, reminding all present of the family connections that had linked the two royal houses for generations. Those personal relationships had survived political upheavals and military conflicts, demonstrating the resilience of human connections even during the darkest periods of history. As the meal progressed, conversation turned to economic cooperation and the practical challenges of maintaining strong trade relationships across different regulatory frameworks. Both leaders understood that business connections often provided the foundation for broader political cooperation. German automotive investment in Britain has created thousands of jobs while advancing innovation in electric vehicle technology, the king observed. These partnerships demonstrate how cooperation can advance both economic interests and environmental goals. British financial services continue to play important roles in German economic development, the president replied. The expertise developed in London benefits projects across Germany, particularly in areas like green financing and sustainable development. The presence of senior diplomats from both countries at the luncheon ensured that the conversations would continue beyond the formal visit. Ambassadors and their staff took careful note of areas where cooperation could be expanded or strengthened, turning ceremonial occasions into opportunities for practical advancement of national interests. Queen Camilla's questions about Mrs. Budenbender's judicial experience led to discussions about how courts in different countries were adapting to new challenges like cybercrime and international terrorism. These conversations revealed the practical importance of legal cooperation in addressing problems that transcended national boundaries. European arrest warrants have revolutionized how we address criminal activity that crosses borders, Mrs. Budenbender explained. But new challenges like cryptocurrency fraud and online exploitation require even more sophisticated forms of judicial cooperation. The training programs for judges and prosecutors have become increasingly international, Queen Camilla noted. Understanding different legal systems helps create the trust necessary for effective cooperation in specific cases. The discussion of cultural preservation brought together interests that both royal couples shared personally. King Charles's long-standing commitment to architectural conservation found common ground with German efforts to preserve historic city centers damaged during the Second World War. The reconstruction of Dresden's Frauenkirche demonstrated how modern techniques could restore historical accuracy while incorporating contemporary safety standards, Charles observed. The craftsmanship required brought together expertise from across Europe. British contributions to that project, particularly in areas of stone carving and metalwork, showed how cultural preservation can itself become a form of international cooperation, President Steinmeier replied. As coffee was served in delicate cups that had witnessed similar conversations for over a century, the atmosphere became more relaxed while maintaining the underlying seriousness of purpose that had characterized the entire visit. Personal anecdotes began to emerge alongside policy discussions, creating the kind of human connections that made future cooperation more likely. The German president's stories about his early diplomatic career revealed the challenges of representing his country during the reunification period, when Germany was rebuilding relationships with neighbors while managing enormous internal changes. His experiences provided perspective on current European challenges. King Charles's reflections on his own preparation for kingship, including extensive study of constitutional monarchy and international relations, demonstrated his long-standing commitment to understanding his role in global affairs. The depth of his knowledge about German history and culture impressed his guests while reinforcing their confidence in continued cooperation. The conclusion of the luncheon marked a natural transition toward the afternoon's ceremonial activities, but the relationships established during the meal would continue to influence diplomatic cooperation long after the visit ended. Personal understanding between leaders often proved more important than formal agreements in determining how nations responded to unexpected challenges. As they prepared to leave the state dining room, all four participants understood that they had contributed to something larger than a single diplomatic encounter. They had reinforced bonds between nations that had survived previous tests and would need to endure future challenges in an increasingly complex world. The afternoon ceremony in Windsor Castle's quadrangle brought together elements of tradition and modern diplomacy that characterized the evolving relationship between monarchy and international relations. A carefully selected audience of diplomats, cultural leaders, and representatives from both German and British communities in each other's countries gathered to witness the formal presentations that would conclude the visit. King Charles stood before the assembled guests, his words carrying the weight of both personal conviction and constitutional responsibility. The speech he delivered had been crafted through careful consultation with government ministers while reflecting his own deep understanding of British-German relations. President Steinmeier's visit today reminds us that the strongest international relationships are built not just on formal agreements, but on shared values and mutual respect, the king began. The friendship between our nations has been tested by history's greatest challenges and has emerged stronger for having survived those tests. The German president's response drew upon his extensive diplomatic experience, while acknowledging the unique role that royal visits played in international relations. His words reflected understanding of how ceremonial occasions could advance practical cooperation. Your Majesty, the warmth of today's reception demonstrates the deep affection that exists between our peoples, President Steinmeier replied. Germany and the United Kingdom face the future together, united by commitment to democracy, human rights, and international law. The ceremony included the presentation of gifts that had been chosen to represent cultural connections between the two nations. The Chippendale writing desk, presented to President Steinmeier, carried documentation, tracing its creation to the period when German craftsmen were working in English workshops, demonstrating how cultural exchange had enriched both societies for centuries. Queen Camilla received a collection of German porcelain that had been commissioned specifically for the visit, each piece representing different regions of Germany, while incorporating design elements inspired by British decorative traditions. The gifts served both ceremonial and practical purposes, creating lasting reminders of the relationships established during the visit. The German delegation's presentation to the royal couple included rare books from German libraries that documented early scientific cooperation between British and German researchers. The volumes, some dating to the 18th century, showed how intellectual exchange had created foundations for modern cooperation in areas like renewable energy and medical research. Mrs. Budenbender's brief remarks focused on legal cooperation and the importance of maintaining judicial independence in both countries. Her words carried particular weight given her professional background and her understanding of how legal systems could support broader diplomatic goals. The rule of law provides the foundation for all other forms of cooperation, she observed. When nations trust each other's legal systems, they can build partnerships that benefit their citizens in countless practical ways. The audience for the ceremony had been carefully chosen to represent the breadth of British-German connections that existed beyond government relationships. University professors who had spent sabbaticals in each other's countries sat alongside business leaders whose companies operated on both sides of the English Channel. Representatives from German communities in Britain and British communities in Germany provided personal testimony to the human dimensions of international relationships. Their presence reminded all participants that diplomacy ultimately served real people whose lives were enriched by cooperation between nations. The ceremony also recognized young people who had participated in exchange programs, highlighting the investments both countries were making in future generations. Students who had studied abroad spoke briefly about experiences that had broadened their understanding while creating lasting friendships across national boundaries. Learning German opened doors I never expected, said a British student who had spent a year at the University of Heidelberg. But more than language skills, I gained appreciation for different approaches to problems we face together. A German student who had studied at Oxford University expressed similar sentiments. British educational traditions challenged me to think differently about European history and culture. These personal connections become the foundation for future cooperation. The afternoon also included brief presentations about scientific collaboration that was advancing knowledge in areas crucial to both nations' futures. Climate research conducted jointly by British and German institutions was producing insights that influenced policy decisions while demonstrating how cooperation could address challenges too large for any single country. Medical research partnerships had accelerated development of treatments for diseases affecting populations in both countries. The sharing of data and expertise had created advances that neither nation could have achieved alone, while establishing protocols for future collaboration in health emergencies. Cultural exchanges received particular attention during the ceremony, with representatives from museums, orchestras, and artistic institutions describing programs that had brought German and British artists together. These collaborations had produced works that reflected both traditions while creating new forms of expression that transcended national boundaries. The British Museum's collaboration with German archaeological institutions had advanced understanding of European prehistory while developing new techniques for artifact preservation. Music festivals featuring performers from both countries had introduced audiences to cultural traditions they might never have encountered otherwise. As the formal ceremony concluded, informal conversations began among audience members who discovered shared interests and potential areas for future cooperation. These spontaneous connections often proved as valuable as the formal agreements reached by government officials. Diplomats from both countries found themselves discussing practical matters like visa procedures for students and researchers, recognition of professional qualifications across borders, and coordination of environmental monitoring programs. These conversations would continue through official channels, but were facilitated by personal relationships established during royal visits. Business leaders explored opportunities for partnerships that could advance economic interests, while supporting shared goals like renewable energy development and sustainable manufacturing. The royal setting provided a neutral environment where competitive concerns could be set aside in favor of broader cooperation. The participation of religious leaders from various faiths represented in both countries added another dimension to the afternoon's activities. Their conversations focused on shared challenges like supporting refugee populations and maintaining community cohesion in increasingly diverse societies. Educational administrators discussed programs that could expand student exchange while addressing practical concerns like housing, language preparation, and academic credit transfer. Their detailed conversations would eventually produce agreements that benefited thousands of young people seeking international experience. The conclusion of the formal ceremony marked a transition toward the departure preparations that would end the visit. But the relationships established throughout the day would continue to influence British-German cooperation in countless ways. Personal connections made during royal visits often proved more durable than political agreements, surviving changes in government while providing continuity for international relationships. As guests began to disperse, many exchanged contact information and made commitments to continue conversations that had begun during the afternoon. The royal visit had served its purpose not just as ceremony, but as catalyst for practical cooperation that would benefit both nations in ways both visible and invisible to public attention. The departure ceremony at Windsor Castle carried special significance as the final public moment of a visit that had strengthened bonds between nations while addressing practical challenges facing both countries. King Charles and Queen Camilla stood with President Steinmeier and Mrs. Budenbender in the same courtyard where they had met hours earlier, but the relationships between them had deepened through shared conversations and mutual understanding. The German presidential limousine waited nearby, but the formal farewell would allow both sides to summarize achievements and commitments made during the visit. Press representatives from both countries documented moments that would appear in newspapers and broadcasts, but the real significance lay in agreements and understandings that extended far beyond public visibility. President Steinmeier, your visit has reaffirmed the friendship between our nations while opening new possibilities for cooperation, King Charles said, as cameras recorded his words for audiences in London and Berlin. The discussions we have shared today will guide our work together as we face the challenges and opportunities ahead. The German president's response reflected satisfaction with substantive progress made during private conversations, as well as appreciation for the ceremonial aspects that gave international relationships their public dimension. Your Majesty, Queen Camilla, today's discussions have demonstrated once again that Germany and the United Kingdom share fundamental values and common purposes. We leave with confidence in our continued partnership. Behind the formal statements lay concrete agreements that would influence cooperation in areas ranging from scientific research to cultural exchange. University partnerships would expand to include new fields of study, while business relationships would develop around emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and renewable energy storage. Queen Camilla's conversations with Mrs. Budenbender had produced commitments to expand legal cooperation, particularly in areas affecting women's rights and children's welfare. Their professional backgrounds had enabled discussions that went beyond ceremonial pleasantries to address practical challenges facing both societies. The programs we have discussed today will create opportunities for young women in both countries to see law and public service as ways to make meaningful contributions, Mrs. Budenbender observed. Personal connections between professionals often prove more important than formal agreements in creating lasting change. The departure ceremony also provided opportunity to acknowledge individuals who had contributed to British-German cooperation over many years. Long-serving diplomats, cultural leaders, and business executives received recognition that honored their work while encouraging others to follow their examples. Sir Clive Alderton's coordination of the visit had ensured that every detail reflected the importance both nations placed on their relationship. His experience with international protocol had created an environment where substantive discussions could occur alongside ceremonial requirements. The German ambassador to the United Kingdom, along with his British counterpart in Berlin, had spent weeks preparing for the visit while maintaining ongoing dialogue about bilateral cooperation. Their work would continue as they translated today's agreements into practical programs benefiting both countries. Cultural attachés had arranged exchanges that would bring German artists to British festivals while sending British performers to venues across Germany. These programs created personal connections between creative communities while introducing audiences to different artistic traditions. The farewell handshakes and embraces carried emotional weight that reflected genuine friendships developed during years of cooperation. King Charles and President Steinmeier had worked together on various international initiatives, but today's extensive conversations had deepened their mutual understanding and trust. Queen Camilla and Mrs. Budenbender had discovered shared concerns about social issues affecting both countries, from supporting elderly populations to ensuring educational opportunities for disadvantaged children. Their continued correspondence would advance cooperation in areas where royal and presidential spouses could provide unique leadership. As the German delegation prepared to depart, staff members from both countries exchanged final details about follow-up activities that would implement agreements reached during the visit. Scientific conferences would be scheduled, student exchange programs would be expanded, and business partnerships would receive government support where appropriate. The media coverage of the departure focused on ceremonial aspects that provided visual drama, but informed observers understood that the real significance lay in commitments made during private conversations. These agreements would influence policy decisions for years while creating frameworks for addressing future challenges. Economic cooperation had received particular attention during the visit, with both sides recognizing that trade relationships provided foundations for broader partnership. British expertise in financial services complemented German strengths in manufacturing and engineering, creating opportunities for collaboration that benefited both economies. Environmental cooperation had emerged as another priority area, with both countries facing similar challenges in transitioning to sustainable energy systems while maintaining economic competitiveness. Joint research programs would accelerate development of technologies needed to address climate change while creating commercial opportunities. Security cooperation, while discussed in general terms during public sessions, had been addressed more specifically during private conversations between the leaders. Both nations faced similar threats from international terrorism and cyber attacks, requiring coordination that transcended formal alliance structures. The educational exchanges that had been expanded during the visit would create lasting connections between young people from both countries. Students who spent time studying abroad often returned home with understanding and appreciation that influenced their entire careers, whether in public service, business, or academic life. Cultural programs received strong support from both royal couples, who understood that personal connections between artists, writers, and performers often preceded and facilitated other forms of cooperation. Festivals, Exhibitions and performances would introduce audiences to different traditions while creating new collaborative works. As the presidential limousine departed Windsor Castle, it carried more than just the German delegation back to London. It carried commitments and relationships that would continue to develop long after the ceremonial aspects of the visit had faded from public memory. The success of the visit would be measured not just in immediate media coverage, but in the practical cooperation that would emerge over months and years. University partnerships would produce joint research, business relationships would create jobs in both countries, and personal friendships would provide informal channels for addressing future challenges. King Charles and Queen Camilla remained in the courtyard briefly after their guests' departure, reflecting on a day that had successfully combined ceremonial tradition with practical diplomacy. Their roles as constitutional monarchs required balancing symbolic responsibilities with genuine engagement in international relations. The empty courtyard would soon return to its normal routines, but the relationships strengthened during the visit would continue to influence British-German cooperation in countless ways. Royal diplomacy, at its best, created human connections that survived political changes while serving the interests of both nations in an increasingly complex world. The visit had demonstrated once again that constitutional monarchy could play valuable roles in international relations, providing continuity and personal relationships that complemented but never replaced democratic governance. Today's success at Windsor Castle represented both tradition and adaptation, honoring the past while building foundations for future cooperation.